That actually occurred to me. Continue to have some more conversations. But in the interest of time, everyone's coming back from daylight savings time. There's been some changes in ARA, but I want to make sure that we get the chance to enjoy the privilege of having Dr. Barbara Schneider, Donna Hannah's chair at Michigan State University, former president of AERA, I'm getting all my titles off, not having but wonderful things. Check the website and the bio. Mentor and friend, Dr. Barbara Schneider, here to talk about her work on learning science. Thank you so much, and welcome to FSU.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. I just, for those of you who aren't entirely sure, Lara was certainly one of the superstars at the University of Chicago in the graduate program. So those of you that are graduate students should know you have with you truly a superstar. And it was my privilege to work with her, and it was truly my privilege. So what I'm going to talk about today is a project that is actually two projects under one umbrella. One is a study funded by the National Science Foundation, that's the one I'm mainly talking about, and that was done under the International Office, and it's in collaboration with the University of Helsinki. We are now at the end of that grant. The second one is a little kids study in third grade that's funded by the George Lucas Foundation, yes, the Star Wars Foundation. Yeah. But the interesting thing about both of these projects is, as I go through this, I just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. You'll see that they both have a similar design, and all of the principles that I'm going to be going through are the same principles we're going through. So one of the things that I did is I put my collaborator, I'm the PI on the adolescent study, and he's my co-PI, and then I'm his co-PI on the little people study. I've never been a person of little people. I've really been more in adolescent research and higher education. But we all need to be stretched, no matter how old we are. So I'm stretching as I learn more again about little people. But really what I want to talk about, because the whole reason I'm engaged with both of these projects is my interest in design, in trying to raise capacity in the field of educational research, and how do we do that, and why do we do that, and what are the kinds of things that we should be doing to make that happen. And I'm going to argue with you, if you really want causal estimates, if you really want to be sure about a true effect, the best way to do that is with intervention research. Okay, so essentially I've written what I'm going to go through, why we need evidence, how to form evidence on one particular area that I think would be of interest to everyone. The first steps in developing a theory of action and how that looks different than a logic model, procedures, measures, and results, and then what we're learning. Okay, so the most important thing about why we need interventions is that policymakers always want to know how to make decisions, what works, what doesn't. Now, granted, there are certain things you cannot have interventions for, because you can't put people in one group and another group, because it would be unethical to do those kinds of things. Retention, for example, is a perfect example. You can't say to a parent, we're going to do a study on retention. Can we please have your child? In other words, are you going to retain some students and then not retain some others? I mean, there are certain kinds of things we would never do. And we would always go to secondary observation data sets to look at. But if in fact you were trying to come up with a new reading program, a new math program, if you were trying to come up with a certain kind of, in higher education, you could think about if you wanted a certain policy with respect to childcare for faculty members or some other kind of thing. You could imagine where some faculty might want to find out, oh, does this really help my workload? Is this something that's of value? So we want to think about causal questions. And remember, we are always looking at the effect of the cause, not the cause of the effect. And I think that if those of you who might not quite get that, what happens is if you look at the cause of something, you could have lots of reasons for the cause of something. But if you have a type design that you really are just interested in the effect of something, that's very different. Because then you have isolated the measures that clearly are related to the cause. So, in 2007, I was the lead person on this book that we did for AERA. If you don't have it, I would strongly advise you to go to the AERA website and download it. If you're an AERA member, it's free, it's downloadable. It's a primer about causal inference. And you don't have to have extensive knowledge of statistics. It's written for anybody. I know because they chose me to do the writing because I knew the least of everybody. So therefore, I made it so that anybody that didn't really know anything could end up knowing something. And then the idea is to really get a handle on what it we want to do intervention research. Now, the beauty of this particular book, although it's not where we are in the most sophisticated way that we're estimating causal inference through all different kinds of methods, of which Carolyn and Gwen, as the editor of EdResearch, has so beautifully chosen work that shows that. It is, in fact, a way to understand what it means. And also, it explains if you want to use other kinds of data sets, what kinds of methods you need to use to be able to do that. So there's a little bit on propensity score matching, instrumental variables, fixed effects models, not anything new on diff and diff. There's some very nice models, SEM models, and then there Steve Roddenbush and Humvee have a very nice piece on how we use national longitudinal data sets to understand and look at a particular kind of policy intervention that cannot be done in an actual intervention. But I want to talk to you about an intervention. Why do I want to talk to you about this intervention? Well, first I thought it would be nice for you to get some sense about what we have. And really, as a scientist, no matter, as a social scientist, no matter what you're doing, you have to have evidence. You have to lead with evidence. I have over $90 million of external support that I have gotten. Why? Because I do not make claims. Integrity claims, they have to happen with evidence. You have to be able to look at fair comparisons. You need to be able to understand what's a fair comparison. What are the boundaries around a fair comparison? And you have to be able to produce reproducible and replicationable results. Now, what does that mean? Now, there are two new themes that have come in as a result of all the new work on fade out. Fade out in intervention research has basically been, we give you an intervention, we get great results, but then 2 or 3 years later, it goes away. And that's true in higher education too. You can bring in a program and it looks great. We have a piece in SHRI, the Journal of Educational Effectiveness. We did a mindset intervention with our incoming freshmen. We used a huge amount of data to be able to look at that. We had Hispanic students, did great. Second year, we didn't have an effect for anybody. So this notion of fade out is very real. The ability to be able to understand data, the ability to understand the quality of the claims that you're making. It's really important that you think about any kind of project that you're creating as one if you gave your code to somebody else, or if somebody took your code, will they have the same results within about 150%? That is really very important. In my lab, I make my students rerun everybody has ever done. No, we never get away with, one run on any particular, ever. And the most important thing, we're not going to go around spending our careers asking for code and rerunning other people's data to look to see if we come in with the 100th point. But what we will want to do is we will want to do tell stories that are reproducible. What's a reproducible story? That's one that has variation. Maybe you're on the same topic, but you looked at it very differently, you have a different frame, you have a different lens, and you changed your variables. But you're not changing a whole lot of variables, but you are changing and you're making changes. So that's a very important thing to take away. So how do we test? Well, one is if you want to know whether an intervention has an effect, I think the most important thing is it has to be theoretically grounded on principles. I do not like any of the new work that's coming out that is not embedded in a really strong theoretical design. I also think it's very important to pre-register any study you have. How many people here are familiar with pre-registration? You've got to pre-register all of your studies. If you don't know what this is, go online, go to pre-registration. Every study should be pre-registered. Okay, what about measurable effects? How many of you are familiar with power effects? Okay, that's good. Most of you know that. If you don't, other things to go online for. There's a new primer on how to use power. So you definitely want to be able to look at these things because these are also important things that you need to know. Then you have to have a sound measure of base and content validity. And by that, you really should be looking for rubrics, and the rubric is what's the measure and how's it going to be measured. So you can't just decide, oh, we're going to do this, this is how we're going to measure it, this is how people have always measured it. You have to ground those things. And it's much better if you can show that you've done this over multiple times, and multiple times. Then finally, you want reliable measures and tools. You want to look for scales and things that have been done in other studies. You want to look and make sure that they match what it is that you're looking for. And if you're using a secondary database or you're creating your own database, you really have to do some development work on that. And finally, you want to be able to do a sensitivity analysis. You know, how many people know what a sensitivity analysis is? Okay, has Ken Frank been here? Bring Ken Frank, and this room will be filled, because then you're going to learn any study today is probably not going to be published unless it has a sensitivity analysis, which means how many cases. Once I have my result, and this is for secondary analysis or intervention work, how many cases do I have to invalidate the effect that I have? So that's where research is today, and this is where I think research will be for the future. Okay, so what was our challenge? Essentially, our challenge was the following. We feel very strongly that science education today does not meet the next generation of science standards. How many people here know what the next generation of science standards are? Okay, next generation of science standards were done by the National Academy of Sciences, and essentially what they say is how science should be taught in schools. Now, this is really a very important point, because the National Science Foundation, if you're applying to the National Science Foundation, looks to make sure that your proposals are consistent with the next generation of science standards. That includes higher education. And I'm going to go off for a second and a little bit, and I'll tell you about a meeting I was at and what people in higher education told me about the kinds of things that I'm going to talk to you about. You have to have a deep and integrated understanding of important ideas. You want to be able to engage students. And I'm going to show you just a model that I've used on engagement. You have to support students in important scientific practices and solving problems. Okay. All right, so we have something called crafting engagement in science environments, and this is our treatment. So why do we have a treatment? So the story is very quick, so let me just tell you, I was invited to a meeting at the National Science Foundation with Finland. I sat down at a table by myself. I tend to be a little bit of outlier, and this man sat next to me. His name is Jari Vaatamo. We started talking. He was from Finland, I was from the United States. And we had a common colleague together, Katarina Salmonella Arno from Finland. And before we knew it, we were told in this meeting that we had a few hours to develop a proposal, and that they would choose the best proposal and they would give that proposal some sort of an award. So, Jari, we had never met. And he said, you write, I'll talk. And so he talked, I wrote, and we won. And the idea was, what is it about engagement? How do you engage students in science learning? Not just elementary or secondary students, but higher education students too. How do you engage them? And I said to Jari, we can't study engagement without an intervention. How are we going to be able to measure that? You have to have an intervention that in that intervention you're measuring engagement. We're not going to just study engagement as some topic out there. That doesn't make any sense. I hope no one here is an educational psychologist. I'm not very big on traits. I'm very big on space, because I feel that all of these social and emotional learning ideas come through momentary experiences that we have. You have certain bands that can be a happy person, a sad person, but for the most part, all of us function pretty much in the same band. But we go up with things that are meaningful and important to us, and we go down on things that they don't seem to matter to us because we're going in a certain other direction. So you may not be paying as much attention because you may think, well, I'm not going to be doing these kinds of things. I don't really have to pay that much attention. Or you could be saying, oh, she's telling me a lot of things that are going to be helpful for the kind of work I want to do. So we decided we would have an intervention. We got a huge amount of money from the National Science Foundation after winning 2 other competitions. And we were the only education proposal that has ever been funded in the international section of NSF. Why is that? Number one, they take only one proposal from an institution. And that means that your institution is going to go up or down. Well, at our institution, even though we have a wonderful school, college of education, not next to physics and everybody else. We were not number one. Anyway, they chose us, which was unheard of. That Michigan State University would have chosen an education proposal to submit. So one, we had to pass that. And the vice president of research called me up on the telephone and said, Barbara, you better bring this home because we turned down physics and agriculture for you. I said, okay, no pressure here. So then the next thing they do is they do, so essentially what happens is all of the universities in the country, and every university in the country, especially any of them that have research capacity, will put in a proposal for this particular kind of situation. They'll be in astronomy, they'll be in biology, they'll be in agriculture, and they'll be with Italy, they'll be with Spain, they might be with Africa, and they put in to the National Science Foundation. And then the National Science Foundation then does a cut. So we survived the first cut, and I couldn't believe we survived the first cut. There were 60 out of the, I think it was 300 or 400 proposals that they got. That meant that 60 went to panel. And you go to panel, then they decide what they want. So went to panel, and we were one of the 17 that were chosen. I think that it was just that time when they decided, well, maybe it's time we gave education a chance. Once we got the award, Yari and I then expanded our team and said, we need somebody who will give us a science invention through which we can measure engagement. Otherwise, we won't be able to do this. He said, what about Joe Krajcik? I said, he works at my institution. We'll find him. We found Joe, and that's the other name on this presentation. Why? Because he's an expert in science education research. He's one of the leading experts in science education research. Why? Because he does something called project-based learning. And project-based learning, which he has devised a principles way of thinking about it, involves making students ask the questions, and it's very much doing activities. So anyway, we decided this is the way to go. We felt very strongly about this. And what did we do? Well, first we had, and I'm going to talk about the development stage. We're in the process right now of the efficacy trial, which is going unbelievably, which I'll also tell you just a little bit about. I better hurry along here. So our system includes a highly developed educative materials and specified student materials. We have professional learning supports. So by this, I mean, it isn't your typical kind of teachers how to do this. We have extensive professional learning, and we do virtual as well as in person. And then we have different assessments that we have put together, and then we use assessments that other people have, which keeps us clean with respect to the Walkways Clearinghouse, which gives recommendations for how you should do interventions. I'm sorry, I'm not used to like going up and down with my finger. So anyway, we started with a very small initiative, and then we now are in the process where we have 130 teachers, 70 schools, over 8,000 students. If the project is in both California and in Michigan, the major work I want to show you, because it's about social and emotional learning, which I think is kind of interesting, is from the development stage. Okay, so why did we build this interdisciplinary team? And I would like you all to look at this and think very hard about this for your future lives, because this is really, I think, the way that educational research has to go in the future, which is you can't know everything. It's just impossible. And you don't want to put on your team people just like yourself, because what are you going to learn from those people? I always tell my students, find somebody not like you and me, find somebody different to work with. And so we deliberately went for Joe, high quality research, but he knew something I didn't know. And so it was really important to bring him together. You have to have on your team someone with solid analytic expertise. Whether you're doing a qualitative study where you're interviewing and then you're going to move to machine learning, no matter what it is that you're doing, you absolutely have to have strong analytic help. And one of the problems today with qualitative work is that field is changing enormously because of machine learning. So where it used to be that we would rely on some of these programs, we can teach the machine how to be able to do things. And they can look at constructed responses that people make through interviews and other things, and they can give us back so that we can basically look at constructed responses for thousands of people. And they have voice recognition and face recognition and so much that's going on within the context of how we used to do qualitative work that has changed dramatically. And so the last thing is these teams, and I know that Lara does this too, and Carolyn, but it is really important. Our teams are undergraduates, a lot of them in physics, in fact, a huge number of them in physics and chemistry. Graduate students also from physics or measurement and quantitative methods. Very few in teacher education part, but that's another commentary on another comment. Postdoctoral fellows, a lot of people that come from other countries to learn about what we're doing, because we have a huge amount of countries that are interested in replicating what we've done. Content specialists. We build content specialists. So if you're doing a higher education proposal, and let's say you want to study law, you really need somebody who knows law, higher education law. You have to have people that actually work in that field all the time as specialists. And then that changes things very dramatically. I gotta get this right. So what were our claims? That we said that our students are going to show an ability to do better in science. How are we going to measure that? First, according to the What Works Clearinghouse, we had to get a benchmark, a pre-test measure that wasn't ours. We used NAEP. So we used NAEP science items. And then we had to have a summative test that wasn't ours, that we had nothing to do with. And in our case, we used the Michigan Department of Education had just revamped their science exam, and they were willing to let us use the science exam. And then we wanted to know, well, if the kids learn more science, would they also show that they were engaged? Did we expect them to be engaged? So we were using engagement in our intervention. So this was our theory, and it's important. There are all of the things that I have just basically said. The three-dimensional instruction comes from a National Research Council report that basically said that what we're doing in science learning should be three-dimensional. It should involve disciplinary core ideas, cross-cutting concepts, and scientific practices. That's what built the project-based learning intervention. Then we were very interested in the social and emotional issues related to engagement. And the reason I am hoping that some people here in higher education will pay attention to this, because people in higher education have also used this. And they have found this to be very much a similar kind of framing of something that gives very similar results, which is that basically, instead of thinking about engagement as one thing, oh, well, are you interested in science? We don't think that's the way to go. It has to be relevant. It has to be personally relevant and meaningful to you. You have to be challenged, meaning you have to allow some vulnerability in terms of something you don't know. And finally, you have to have skills. So you have to have skills. And then what we do is, because we have all of these different kinds of measures, we're able to look to see, well, did these other things happen? So did they say they were distracted? And that's why they didn't have high engagement. And by distraction, did they say they were bored or confused? Did they say they were enjoying what they were doing? They were happy, they were successful, they were in control? Well, those are accelerants. Those are things that really are going to have that enhancers that are going to make you feel really good about what you're doing. And then are the accelerants. And the accelerants are those things that everything you do has to have just a touch of anxiety. You gotta have just a touch of anxiety. What does that mean? If in fact you just sort of are like, oh, da, 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 you're just not paying or concentrating in a way. And it has to have some sort of sense to you that has value in life. Or otherwise, if you don't feel something's at stake, it doesn't excite you and motivate you quite the same way. So we're very interested in those kinds of things. And then what we measure at the end is student academic learning and social and emotional learning. Now, for the What Works Clearinghouse, we only measure student academic learning because the issues about social and emotional learning are very much exploratory, and they have to be exploratory because that field is not, in my view, a field by which you can really feel extraordinarily confident, and I'm not even sure that you can do accountability and measurement on self-ethics, on questions related to that in any kind of a way, ownership, agency, a lot of these things that we think are really out there as trait-like behaviors that help kids learn in school, mindset, etc. I'm not entirely sure, one, that they show growth over time, and number two, I think that they're all worthwhile, but I think they're worthwhile in the context of being supported in the classroom. People disagree with me, but that's where I am on that. So this is our logic model. The difference between the theory model is how we theoretically think about it. This is the logic model. Logic, who's our target? Our target was high school students in chemistry and physics classrooms. The intervention was what I gave you in chemistry and physics that Joe had put together. And then we measured both proximal and distal outcomes. And this was our curriculum. We hope that we bracketed improved social and emotional outcomes, fidelity of implementation to see if that enhanced science learning. So this is our model for how we put it all together in terms of project-based learning. And these are our units that we developed. It's 12 weeks in chemistry, 12 weeks in chemistry, 12 weeks for physics. They were two separate different units. These are the things it's all very different. It really is different. In fact, we've had students that have taken videos of what we're doing because everything we do, the sodium explodes, the cars crash. Everything is sort of a very different way of learning science. You walk into the room, you're not going to sit at your desk for much of it, or have the kind of presentation that I'm making today. You're going to do something, and we make the teachers all do all the things that we ask the students to do. So, okay. So anyway, I thought it might be just worthwhile to talk a little bit about social and emotional learning, simply because what we're interested here is I was very curious, did this kind of, blow it up and crash them out? Did it increase imagination? Did kids actually solve one kind of a problem? I also thought this would be great mediation work in STEM modeling, exploring different points of view. So these are questions that we developed. A lot of them are based on work that I've been doing for 20 years. So this is all within that same context. And then we used ones from OECD, from PISA. Why did we use those? We always do measures in every study that I've ever done that I can also look at with other large-scale data sets. If I'm doing a small study, no matter what kind of study I do, I always have measures that I can always see. How would this have looked if I analyzed it with a larger data set? And that's really a very important part of all research. Where else can you look for your findings? Because then when you get that finding that doesn't look like anybody else, you want to be sure everything else lines up, which is a nice way of really finding out more about the work you've done. So we use something called the experience sampling method. The experience sampling method is with your smartphone. Now you have to understand it was invented by, the software program was invented by Robert Evans, who turned out to be a friend of mine from Google. And the reason you use smartphones is very important. When we first started doing this work, school districts and everybody were very hesitant. But now, 95% of all teenagers use smartphones. 95. It doesn't matter if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're black, if you're yellow, or green, or purple, you will use a smartphone. And this is a huge change that everybody walks around with their phone. The average 17-year-old spends 7 hours and 22 minutes a day on their phone. So the ESN is a great little thing. You can put it on a telephone. It's called Paco, and I keep it on my phone. And essentially you go in, it's a Qualtrics survey. It takes about 1.5 minutes to do. And then at the end of it, it gets uploaded to a website that's secure with an ID, so we can check your ID. And some of the kinds of things, I'm not going to go through everything, and I can see the time running out, so you'll have to read along. I'm not going to talk about every single one. But essentially, what we have done here is that we have masses of this ESN data on high school kids in their chemistry and physics classes. And because of the fact that I was trained by Mahal Yoshitsune, who invented flow theory, I also have tons of data about what you're doing at other times in your life, and I can go into that in a little bit more time. But the dog barks, and that's when you know you are going to film this. We explain to the teachers, essentially you get 4 beeps in your physics class, and then you get, or chemistry class, and then you get other beeps at other times. You do it for, we've done it in different ways. We've done it for a full week. We've done it for 3 days of 1 week, and then later at another time. Students use their own phones now. Originally, we used to give them phones, but now we just move to their own phones just because it's a whole lot easier. And we're finding that we really are seeing some very different things. I have this incredibly rich data about social and emotional learning. Okay, so what do we have? The most interesting thing about this particular study that we have done is we have actually followed the IES protocol for what's development work, what's efficacy work, and then how do you build an effectiveness trial. So what did we do? We started out as a development study. And in the development study, we had 12 Michigan treatment high schools and 12 Michigan control classrooms. And then when we moved up and we went to California, which is, you know, where we are now, back to those original numbers I showed you before, then essentially what we decided to do there, because it was made monitoring so difficult, is that we did ESN data collection when we were in our efficacy trial, but we did it voluntarily. And now we're measuring ESN data for 1 week in each classroom. All right. So in our earlier work, because we didn't, in the development stage of our work, we did not have a pure treatment control condition. We really had propulsive schools, and we worked with them very much following what you do in development work. And therefore, what we had to do, is, since we didn't have a control school, is we used what's called a single case design. That is, we told the teachers to use our materials for a certain period of time and then not to use them, to use our materials and then not to use them. And so when you look at baseline, baseline is basically the materials at the base, and then during the treatment, then at the baseline, then the treatment, and see how the treatment spikes at the end. Well, I want you to know we were so excited about what we did with this results. And when we measured science learning and everything that we did, we wrote a book called Learning Science, and we'll show it to you in a few moments. But I need I have to talk about what we're finding right now because it's amazing. We have what's called a quarter of a standard deviation effect. We have a 0.01 effect for our intervention on over 7,000 kids that were randomly assigned in California and in Michigan. That's totally unheard of for an 11 or 12-week intervention in a high school, in a classroom of physics and science. This is unbelievable. At the elementary level, our effect size is even larger, but you would expect it to be. One, we don't have as many students. We have 2,000 we only are in Michigan there. And they're in development. So they're third graders, they're learning to read, they're learning their math skills. So there our p-value is 0.001. And essentially, in both cases, what the intervention does, it moves you pretty much. I'm not going to say it's a year's growth or any of those other crazy things that people have been talking about, but it certainly moves you from being not proficient to basic proficiency, if you're sort of near the cusp, which is really, in my mind, I feel very confident to be able to say that. You can get as many as 8 percentage points on a standardized test with the kind of intervention that we give. We have great results on success. We have great results on competence. We have real interesting results on challenge and competitiveness. A lot of graduate students that are writing papers. And when you look at this, you really see these are within, and this is the effect, a linear progression of the intervention over time, and you can see success going up, confidence going up. I think I'd rather go to the end. So what have we found? I mean, these are the most important things. One, kids ask questions. The whole idea is for kids to ask lots of questions. When I gave this at NSF, the people in higher education came up to me and they said, how soon can you do this in higher ed? And one guy came up and he said, we're doing something like this, but this is more, systematic than what we're doing. The kids take over the class, essentially. It's not bedlam or anything crazy like that, but the idea is to get the students more engaged in what they are doing. And to have them involved if they're going to be scientists doing science. The whole point is you can't become and you can't enjoy science if you're not actually doing science rather than watching the video. And it definitely takes you out of your comfort zone. You are not feeling good about it. It's a very different experience. The students that do well in the courses, they can't stand it in the beginning because all they want to know is what's going to be on the test. And this, how am I going to learn what I need to know for what's on the test? And we hear that in physics, we hear that in chemistry. I mean, it's a very different way of learning the material than they've ever experienced before. So anyway, our feeling right now is that we are looking to be able to, one, increase the length of time because we have a leading astrophysicist who wants to work with us because she was so excited with what we were doing in developing onto our curriculum in astrophysics unit. The military science department at Michigan State University wants us to develop more computer-based materials for the people that they take out of the high schools into the military science program for the Department of Defense and to the college. So every person that's touched this, in the beginning, I will not tell you people like us all that much. They don't. But by the end of it, they like us a lot more than they did at the beginning. I mean, we have to tell them, hang in there, And we talk to them and we pay them incrementally over the year, not at one time, so that they're less likely to leave. And we give them materials, and we're like constantly on the phone. We have these lines and we have special people. If you're having trouble and your materials don't work, they call them, they meet Zoom virtually. It is an enterprise, but it's an enterprise for today. It's not an enterprise. We couldn't have done this years ago if we didn't have Zoom and we didn't have the kind of smartphones. And if we didn't have what we have today in terms of helping with web-based materials and opportunities, and it just would have never worked. But fortunately, we live in a different place and space today, and that really makes a difference. So this is our book. And Yale University Press, it's just out right now. I was at the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science meetings. I'm the past now chair of Division K. And essentially, this tells all of our units, this tells all about our design, what we did, the principles we used, why we did it. I am so disappointed because Heather didn't send me books. They've been a little slow in getting the books out. And also I've learned that a lot of the presses are not coming to any of the meetings. This is even before the virus, because people don't buy enough books at the meetings. This is a great book. I hope people love this book. I'm like, I want to go like this with this book, but and this is they got real mad at us because I refused to go with the cover that they had, which I thought was terrible. So we designed our own cover, and these are all people that work in our lab, and it's kind of fun for me. And
the high school students?
Oh, there are high school. This is a high school student. This is the granddaughter of my secretary. And she is 16 years old. He is a high school student. He just graduated and is an undergrad. This is an undergrad, and she's an undergrad. I mean, they all like are, like just out of high school. So anyway, yeah, and they were real happy, and I was overjoyed. So this kind of just gives you a sense of where we are in terms of what it looks like. And our teams, our teachers, how we do these things, they're all in lab coats. I told you, things explode, and it's a different way of doing this. But I wanted you to get the sense of why we did it this way and how exciting it is to do this. When these results were given to, we didn't give them, the people who are project officers gave the results to the board of the George Lucas Foundation. They were they couldn't believe it, they were so excited. They just went, oh my gosh, because little kids do the same kinds of things, They don't blow up things, but they, are very busy on expeditions outside and doing other kinds of experiments and building toys and all things. So it's been a little bit of a rocky road because of the stress of making sure that our results are clean. And in an investment of this size, you really have to be sure. And we have some wonderful people that we go to for advice. Mary Hedges at Northwestern, and the chair of the statistics department, and Jeff Wooldridge, who is a leading economist at Michigan State University, to check our models, look at our work, make sure that we're not misrepresenting anything. I still know that eventually someone will say we did something wrong, but that's part of life. Can't help that. But in the meantime, I'm sailing on a project that is really a winner. And I just hope I can get more people to understand it truly is a winner. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. Yes.
So I would love to know more about implementations. Given that having a lesson where teachers ask questions when you don't know what kind of answer a student gets, and then I work with teachers on lesson study, and many teachers really struggle in research, having this like open and expository and a whole class discussion. So how did you ensure that the lesson is implemented?
Okay, so this is a very important question. Thank you so much for asking. So number one, the next generation of science standards has performance expectations. The performance expectations say these are the things that children are supposed to learn. These are the phenomena you're supposed to know about. What we do, it's not that we don't have lesson plans, we do, but they're not scripted in the sense that follow these lesson plans. They're exemplary. This is the kinds of things that you could do. The whole thing works on what's known as a driving question board. The driving question board says, well, today, so why do you think that it is when, and this is when we use it with little kids, that when I come out of a swimming pool, I feel cold. Why do I feel cold when I come out of the swimming pool? And then the kids sit around and then they raise their hand and they give, well, maybe it's because of why of this, or why that. And the idea here is that she starts it, or he starts it. I think you're supposed to say they started, and then everyone joins. And then you allow that to go on for a certain period of time, not the whole lesson, of course. So there are tips for the teacher on how to do this, but I have to admit that, in the beginning, there was one of our observers, because we of course have observers to measure fidelity and he came back and I was looking at the video and he said to me, "This is my favorite teacher." And I said to him, "Are you really? This woman had those children on the floor for an hour. Who puts third graders at the driving question board? Now, does that make sense?" So it's constant. It has to be constant monitoring, constant looking. And to be truthful, there are some days when I am really exhausted. I'm so stressed because you have to look at the videos. You have to interface with the teachers. You have to be able to have facilitators that are out there that know what to expect to help the teacher. Now, we are not the only people in the whole US that are doing this. So there is a group I know only because my daughter is one of their trainers in California, and they do a kind of similar thing. I don't think it's what we do, but what do you expect? This is mother knows best, clearly. But they do a very similar kind of thing where you have observers and then when things start to go bad or things don't work out, that they're very much have the materials, the resources, the questions, how to intervene. So you're never left in the context of never not knowing where to go and what to do next. So then the question becomes, how do you scale it? Because we, in both the case in California and in our case too, we've been doing a lot of hands-on professional development. Right now we are working on that. In fact, this summer we're developing a whole different opportunity for teachers to see if we can enhance their own initiative, ownership, and agency in terms of being better at doing this without so much support from us. Other questions?
Why you calling the book, why do you term science environments?
Okay. Because the reason we used environments is because that's what we're doing. We're changing the environment in which science is taught. physically and emotionally and in terms of its content. So the whole idea was that if, you know, as a sociologist, of course, to me, it had to be environment. It had to be the context. And we chose learning science because the whole idea, the whole project-based learning experience and everything we're doing is grounded in the learning science literature. I mean, it's not like we invented what people are saying about in neurology and other places about learning science. Of course not. That's not the work we do. But we follow the direction of, you know, increasing executive functioning and all the kinds of things that are supposed to help, and the newest neurological research that's been done on 17-year-olds and their ability to synthesize, bring things together, and develop. So we use that.
So that literature demands a more expansive.
Exactly. Absolutely. And then in terms of the environment, we want to change how kids interact with each other in science classes. We don't want them sitting like this. We want them in groups, and we want them creating and doing different things. So we've worked really hard on trying to do that. And so the environment has changed. And the kids say it's changed. I mean, we get videos from the kids. So, I mean, it's really been exciting. Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you. This was very interesting presentation. So I'm just like wondering, you said to focus on creative implementation of these materials in teachers' classrooms. Like, how do you define fidelity and how do you approach measuring creative implementation?
Sure. That's another great question. I didn't go into these things because they're long and complicated. But anyway, we built an observation schedule, and we built an observation schedule that allowed for sampling. So because we had too many people, we couldn't go to every single classroom. And the observation schedule is not it's not a checklist, because we thought that was really going to be a problem. Because we're doing something so different, we wanted to make sure that question about figuring things out, trying to ask questions, that was in the protocol, not the kind of, did the kids ask questions? They had to ask questions that had to do with the phenomenon and figuring things out and all the rest of it. Then we had to train, and then we had to train these people, and then we trained them, and then we trained them in pairs, and we had IRRs, and then we had ICCs, because we needed to make sure that we didn't have crazy graders on different kinds of things. And so then we had the observation schedules. Only I wasn't so comfortable just with the observation schedules, because I felt that some people had become too friendly with the teachers, and some cases we didn't see any of the teachers, and I just felt like I didn't want that estimate in my model because it was, I mean, I took it and I looked at it and I looked at the information. I also surveyed the teachers, and I surveyed the teachers about, number one, how familiar they were with project-based learning. Number two, other kinds of questions, how they taught science, what they did in science. And so there's a long exit interview. So I looked at the relationship between the exit interviews and observation schedules. And then we asked the kids the same questions. So we had the kids' responses, the teachers' responses, and the observation schedule. It made me feel a lot more comfortable that maybe we actually were able to look at the mediating effect. Because we work in teams, Rachel is our head of the observation team, so it's her job to kind of make sure that that measure of fidelity of implementation kind of is solid, and that can then be used in the SEM model if in fact we are measuring the fidelity of implementation does and what's its impact. Of course, the fidelity of implementation mattered, but it didn't matter as much as what you might have expected, because we have a lot more support than we expected to find. We still have some that we haven't done yet, the intent to treat, the ones that started but then didn't follow through. Another problem we had which is the problem of doing work in schools in the US, is public schools in the US are really susceptible to changes in budget. So you have schools that basically change. I mean, the teacher okay, number one, in San Diego, they had a person that stole $11 million from the budget. So they cut everybody. And we had people that they weren't teaching the same courses anymore. They couldn't because there wasn't enough money to pay them. In California, they had a strike, and they were on strike. In fact, one person called us and said, I had to go in the hospital, I'm having a nervous breakdown, I don't know how to pay my bills. I mean, those are the kinds, that's life in public education. And it's unfortunate. The other thing that I have to tell you that I would put a fire and say, oh, it's time to go. But when you're used to doing this kind of work, you know how to stand here and like not say anything for like 2 minutes. Because in fact, it usually takes about 2 to 3 minutes before everybody has a question. But I know people have questions, so I just thank you very much. I think that's an hour.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Barbara. We really appreciate it. And there'll be times to meet with Barbara during the rest of today that there's a student meeting that'll happen.